All right, so can we actually trust our intuitions? And I think I found a book that actually, from his opinion, that's a resounding no. But there's also some interesting data that says yes in here. But anyways, regardless, so the book I kind of want to go over is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He was a winner of a Nobel Prize in economics. Um, and it's a little bit big, but not very. But why should you read this book to begin with? So, with the view of basically we can't trust our intuitions 100%, he says we need to tap into our slow thinking, what he calls system two, right? And so he kind of divides the brain into our, I guess, like the thinking mind in a way, into two systems. You have system two, which is kind of like your conscious, slower thinking, more analytical, so on. And then you have your system one, which is kind of like your subconscious, fast thinking. That's why he calls it thinking fast and slow for the two different systems, right? So he says basically the idea is we need to tap into our system two more often, but that takes effort. That's unrealistic to do all the time, right? And so basically the goal if from reading this book is to basically be able to recognize situations to where you need to purposefully implement your system two in a way, if that makes any sense, right? Because most of the time people are just doing their regular system one. They're not really thinking about stuff, and that's where like practice and stuff comes into play, in terms of like you start doing like at your job or whatever. You've been doing it for a while, let's say, and so it's like you don't think about it too much. You just do it. Um, but there's certain situations that arise to where you need to slow down and think about it, right? And he goes into a lot of his own personal research into this, in terms of like one with like we'll say experiments that show how and sometimes why the brain kind of does this, um, and so on. And so basically we need to be able to recognize situations where system one, your subconscious, is most likely to make mistakes, and basically control that when necessary, right? So that being said, who is Daniel Kahneman? This book itself was written in 2002, and see if I can read my stuff. So it really goes into like the psychology of judgment, and I think that was also one of his books, but I'm not sure. He's written a lot. He's won a Nobel Prize and has a lot of research and stuff. And I actually plan on going through this book specifically with a fine-tooth comb, making videos on it, because this is something that I believe needs to be like studied in a way. Like you need to have an understanding of not only just for yourself, but like he even says, like it's a lot easier to notice these kind of we'll say fast thinking mistakes in others than it is yourself. And this one thing I really noticed with myself is it's really easy for me to slide into that fast thinking, like just kind of go, not think about it very much, which has done well for me in the past. Um, and I think it's more just like with what I did, especially in school with physics. Like I never really thought about stuff all too much. It just kind of clicked and made sense in a way, which a lot of people that isn't the case. Um, but that's not always the best, especially when you're talking about real life and not just school, because school is it's helpful, but it's not how the world works all the time, regardless. So this book itself, and I misspoke earlier. He won his Nobel Prize in 2002. This book was written in 2011. Okay. This book is 418 pages of content. That doesn't include references and appendices, which are plentiful in the back, which is always a good sign when you're looking at books as such, like this. To take a quote from it, mostly from the back cover. So basically what this book does is it explains the two systems that drive the way we think. System one is fast, intuitive, and emotional. System two is slower, more deliberate, and more logical. The impact of overconfidence on corporate strategies, the difficulties of predicting what will make us happy in the future, the profound effect of cognitive biases, on everything from the playing of the stock market to planning our next vacation. So each of these can be understood only by knowing how the two systems shape our judgments and decisions, right? So kind of a general gist of what this book's about, which is all this video is for, really. Like I said, I plan on going through this thing with a fine-tooth comb, more or less, and like actually kind of understanding the different points in it, because I feel it's important. I think it's important. So basically he breaks this book up into 5 different parts. Part 1 is 2 systems. So he's talking about the characters, system 1, system 2. So he has like characters, how they react with attention and effort. Calls system 2 sometimes the lazy controller, because it doesn't like to, it takes effort to be in system 2, right? To like consciously be actively trying to figure something out, right? That's why we get tired in school and stuff like that, or just work. And then you have the associative machine, which is kind of like your system 1, associating 2 things that you may or may not realize you're associating at the moment. And then also, answering easier questions. And I highlighted something called the Ford example. And basically like he gave a story of a hedge fund manager, I believe, buying Ford stock. And basically the only reason he did it, or the primary reason he did it, he's like, they build nice cars. Like he just likes the cars that they make, right? And so a lot of the times when you're trying to answer a question like, should I buy Ford stock? The question you're actually answering in your head is, do I like Ford cars? And that might not always be the case, but that's just the example he gives, right? To kind of give some form of analogy for you to kind of get where he's going, I guess. So part 2 is heuristics and biases. So he calls something called the law of small numbers, which is basically extremes. There's anchors and the availability bias, right? So basically we'll assume something is more likely by how available that concept is in our head, right? If we're asked, I think the example he gave was something about like murder rates in Michigan, and then he said murder rates in Detroit, I believe. And it was like the people who remembered that Detroit was in Michigan automatically kind of assumed higher murder rates in the state than those who didn't. Believe that's the example he gave. Kind of like how readily that is to bring up, right? And a lot of the times too is like that. I mean, everyone pretty much knows, like, you know, Detroit's in Michigan, but when you're asked out of the blue, you might not recall facts like that, right? And I'm pretty sure anyone or everyone can kind of relate to being asked a question and then like you give a wrong answer and you're like, oh, whenever you're corrected, it's like, oh yeah, that's of course, but you just didn't bring up that information automatically. Kind of like background info, I guess. Part 3 is overconfidence, and he goes into basically intuitions versus formulas, and he gives examples of how that kind of plays for like the, I believe he did like something like, I don't know if it was a hedge fund manager or basically money management. Basically like how they had a formula based version and like an intuition based version, and the formula pretty much always won. And other stuff like that. Part 4 is choices. He gives about reversals. So basically like if someone's shot in a gas station, the victim is awarded more if he was shot in a store he rarely visited, rather as opposed to shot in a store he always goes to. And he goes into some of the psychology, I guess, and stuff like that behind that kind of decision making, because a lot of the stuff he's done, or at least in this book, is applicable to like how to word it, is applicable to like awarding final settlements and lawsuit, I guess. So like how can you kind of format something, or what situations would make people want to award the victim more, or defendant, whatever, that sort of thing. And then his final section, part 5, is 2 selves. So he talks about like the remembering self and the experiencing self, and like where do you place the most weight, right? And so he gives like an example or an experiment where people have to put their hands in like extremely extremely cold water. And like the ones, and it's like the same time, same everything, it's just one of them is actually longer, I think. So like one, I think it's 60 seconds. Like they put like their left hand in, like one group puts one hand in for this, in this cold water for 60 seconds, and that's it. And then they go on the second time and they put their other hand in for the same 60 seconds, same temperature, but they go in for 30 seconds longer, and it decreases by a degree over that 30 seconds, right? And so people actually chose the longer one that actually had the most, if you kind of think about it as like the integral of the time or whatever, like the most most aggregate pain over the trial, I guess. They chose that one because people place most of their weight when they're trying to remember something or know how something was. They place most of the weight on the peak and at the very end. And so when you decrease it by the end, most people are kind of picking that one all the time, and things like that. Even though the first one, where it was consistent the whole time, was less overall, right? And so to give kind of a final quote, so basically people, they will make better choices when they trust their critics to be sophisticated and fair, and when they expect their decisions to be judged by how it was made, not only by how it turned out, right? And I said like kind of good versus correct decisions, right? And so basically, let me read this again. So they will make better choices when they trust their critics to be sophisticated and fair, and they will expect their decisions to be judged by how it was made and not only how it turned out, right? So kind of people wanting to place weight on their the intentions of making a decision, right? Because yes, right. So this is something I've been thinking about for quite some time. Is kind of the difference between what I call kind of good and correct decisions. So just because something ended up being the correct decision and got the desired outcome doesn't necessarily mean it was a good decision to begin with, right? It's kind of like if you're playing blackjack and you're counting cards or whatever, even though, I mean, you're not supposed to, depending on the place, I guess. I've never really played blackjack in a casino, but so you have kind of a rule set, and you can't make decisions already knowing the outcome. So a good decision is something to where you have all your potential information that you have, and you make a decision based off of just what you know right now, regardless of the outcome, right? And so like, let's say you're placing bets in a portfolio or whatever, and you have your base case for the next 5-10 years, whatever, and you allocate accordingly, and so I'd say that's a good decision because it goes with your base thesis, whatever, but whether or not that makes money or proves beneficial and grows over the next 5 to 10 years determines whether it was the correct or incorrect decision, right? But it was still a good decision because you only have so much information to begin with. It's kind of like that saying, you can only play with the cards you have in your hand, not the ones you wish you had in your hand, right? So like you can't go back and try to redo a decision just because it didn't go out the way you wanted. But anyways, this video has gone a little bit longer than anticipated. I try to keep these relatively short just because that's just me talking. But anyways, so like I said, I plan on doing a deep dive about this book and everything, and probably a lot of his actual like scientific papers in here and stuff about it with some of the experiments. I'll probably go into those. But yeah, so here's the book cover one last time. It was a good read. But I'll put all of this in a playlist, and I will put it in probably this corner, hopefully. I don't remember if it switches or not. It's been a minute since I made videos for obvious reasons. But anyways, I'm going to leave this one here, and I'll see you guys in one of those.